The biggest factor that's affected our industry, both in air freight and in sea freight, has been we've had a fair few issues with the US tariffs. A lot of companies have been affected. The United States is a big trading partner of Australia. We've had a lot of customers who've delayed shipments and not imported product that is used to produce their product so they can re-export it and so on. So, the major factors have always been the same around this time of year, and during the year is space availability. We've also seen a lot of mergers of companies, so shipping lines and airlines and so on, where they merge their space allocations. So we found that there has been some issues with being able to load our containers on vessels or load our air cargo into aeroplanes. But overall, we haven't seen any major issues. There's also been, obviously, with a couple of wars, there have been delays in transshipment ports, particularly sea freight, where traditionally, it'll take a week or so for the container to be put on the next available vessel, where now it takes maybe 4 or 5 weeks. So that's impacted the transit times, which is beyond our control. We don't control the shipping lines, but it has put pressure on customers that are trying to hit deadlines and so on. So from that aspect, I think that the biggest part has been delays that have affected industry, and plus the trade war has affected the volume of cargo coming in and out of this country, predominantly to the US. Cargo that was traditionally, made in China, due to these trade wars and so on, factories have popped up in other regions like Vietnam and Malaysia and the Philippines and other Southeast Asian countries. So, we've seen a growth in imports from places like Bangladesh and Vietnam and so on, where a year or so ago, majority of our cargo was coming, in from China. So yeah, I think that's probably been one of the areas that it has surprised me to see products come from regions that over the last 4 or 5 years haven't really been a major import hub for us here in Australia. Space in the shipping line industry has always been challenging for all of us, particularly us freight forwarders. We need to mix and match which carriers we use. We've probably been a bit fortunate that in Australia, we've over the last year or so, we've seen larger ships come into our ports because of some of the drenching that's been done in Melbourne. So larger ships can come into the Melbourne terminal. Volume-wise, we haven't probably seen any major effects. What we have seen is, there's been a lot of blank sailings due to other factors around the world. So, containers have missed certain ports so they can catch up on sailing dates and transit times. Shipping costs have sort of kept to a similar mark to where it was, over the last, 24 months. We haven't seen any major factors. I mean, obviously, leading up into Christmas, New Year, pricing goes up. It's a crazy season. January, February, March, when there's a Chinese New Year and imports predominantly are slowed down, pricing does fluctuate and is lower at that time of the year. But we got our ebbs and flows, and at the moment it's pretty much similar to what it was, say 12 months ago. So pretty much on par where it has been over the last, 3, 4, 5 years. Yeah, we have seen a slight increase in air freight movements, obviously, based around the fact that, there's longer transit times with sea freight. So customers have, needed to hit deadlines. So they've looked at air freight options. There's still a fair bit of room in planes. So we haven't seen any major issues trying to have our cargo loaded. But obviously, with any increase, prices have slightly increased for air freight as well. So, yeah, we have seen a bit of an increase in the air freight flow from particularly Asia. There's not a lot of change that we can really, implement into our business, as our business has been operating for the last 15, 16 years. I mean, what we try to do is, we try to keep up with technology and so on. So from our point of view, we're looking at, more of an AI option with regards to, smooth the transition in our data flow or our operational flow. So, I think that's probably the next big part of of what we do and how our industry moves forward is, we're looking at streamlining, data entry, shipment processes and things like that through AI. What's challenging in a market like this, our economy is in a sort of I wouldn't say a stable situation, but there has been some issues regarding, customers falling over and, money, particularly in smaller businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, cash flow is very important. So, we're always very mindful that we need to look at our cash flow and make sure our customers that are supporting us are also paying us within their terms. So, that has been very challenging, and I'm very pleased that, not just management, but staff have been very diligent in pursuing customers that need to pay on a COD basis or, trying to hit their agreed terms. So that has been a good positive for us. I think there has been some lessons learned and some takeaways. I mean, I think it's very important to still keep close to your customers with all these little things that are happening in our industry with regards to delays and so on. These are things that are beyond our control. We don't own the planes, we don't own the ships, we don't own customs, we don't own the trucks or depots or so on. So we manage the whole process. Very important to be able to manage that whole process and keep on top of it. So our staff have been very good at that and very proactive. So I'm very pleased that we've been able to keep our customers happy in these challenging environments. My personal highlight, I guess seeing the progression of, as I spoke earlier, we're a family business, seeing the progression of my two sons, Stephen and David in their new roles and taking over more responsibility in the business has been a very big positive. It's allowed me to move away from day in, day out operations and manage the business more in regards to visiting our customers, communicating with our customers, finding out what their needs are and what their requirements. So, a big heads up and thank you to Stephen and David for their support. Obviously, our management as well and all the staff at ISS have done a phenomenal job. But the two boys have really stepped up and taken ownership of what they do and what they need to do moving forward. Shippers are always challenged with, the way the industry is moving at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, But we don't see any change in shipping delays in the next quarter. So I must reiterate, and I reiterate all the time, plan in advance, book in advance, pay in advance, all these little things that, is pivotal in the movement of any freight. Make sure you pay your overseas suppliers on time. Make sure the documents are correct on time. Make sure you plan for any delays. Like if we talk about, vessels that aren't direct and are transshipment and they take 4 weeks in Singapore or wherever, Korea, Busan, or wherever the transshipment port is, plan for those 4 weeks. So if it doesn't take 4 weeks, you're ahead of the game. You're not behind the game. So, I think that's very important. Plan. We spoke about air freight. I think that's a big part of shipping moving forward. I think that's going to play probably 20 or 30% of all imports or exports for customers because, we're trying to hit deadlines. But I think that's probably the major part that we need to really concentrate on. Obviously, we're talking about the quarter leading into the crazy period, which I call, the Christmas New Year period, and leading into quarter one. Traditionally, there's a lot more space available, during that period. But, we've seen that, the rates plateaued out, and for the rates to increase, we've seen some blank sailings and so on. So I think that the space is not too bad during this crazy period. We'll see a lot more room during the January, February, March period. So I wouldn't say that there's going to be any major issues. Shipping costs around, quarter four, the Christmas New Year period is always higher. You normally try to factor in at least a couple of $1,000s on your sea freight and maybe 10 or 15% on your air freight. And that never changes. That's been the same over my 30 years in this industry. Leading into quarter one in the new year, pricing traditionally falls. We hit into the Chinese New Year. We hit into periods where a lot of manufacturers are closed around China. So, we do see pricing traditionally, and I don't see, quarter one 2026 to be any different. Pricing will drop thousands and, air freight will get back to the levels that they were prior to quarter four. I think it's very important that you look at other trade lanes or other countries where you can, maybe find manufacturing at a certain price based on some of the factory movements out of traditional China, Korea, Taiwan origins. There's countries like Bangladesh. There's countries like Sri Lanka and Vietnam. Where you can possibly, look at getting some good, partners and suppliers. So yeah, I think that would be probably an area that, some of our customers should have a look at, where exports traditionally went to Europe and the USA. Asia is going to be a very big market for us as well. So maybe you look into that area. Any advice that I'd give to any customer is, at the moment, everything is busy. If you need your shipments to move ASAP, get on top of it. Place the bookings, get them done in advance, and make sure they get loaded. If it's not a rush and it doesn't have to be here before the crazy Christmas, New Year period, I would look at holding off and maybe moving it in the new year, middle to end of January, when the pricing reduces, and vice versa. I mean, the same scenario happens for exports. If it needs to be there tomorrow, get it out as soon as possible. And if it's not as urgent, I would hold off, because you'll see some significant saving in Q1 2026. ISS focus is, as I mentioned earlier in our discussions, is that we need to start looking at technology. Technology is something that is very important in what we do on a day-to-day basis, because everything we do, we communicate. We communicate with shipping lines, customs. We communicate with airlines. I think it's very important that we look at, how we communicate, how quickly we communicate, what formats we communicate in, and, with, AI and so on. I think that's going to play a major part in the growth of not just ISS, but our industry in general. And it'll allow a lot of, the younger generation to start looking at our industry as a viable, source for them, moving forward in regards to a job and income and so on and so on. So, for us to be able to, capture some of the smarter people in our industry, we need to keep up with technology. We need to make sure that we're at the forefront of what the industry offers, and where I'm spending a lot of time looking at that and trying to really, get the right outcomes for our business. Leading into Q1, our major challenges are, most people are going on holidays. A lot of suppliers are closing down, during that period after Christmas. There's a lot of holidays that people go on. Warehouses are closed. So we need to be on top of our game to make sure that, we understand who's open and who's closed. We put systems in place. We also have a lot of staff that go on leave around that period as well. So, we really need to be on top of everything and understand who's around, who's not around, what needs to be delivered, what doesn't need to be delivered. So that's our biggest challenge in leading into Q1, where, we really need to know what our customers are doing and how they'd like it to be done. One thing that we're aiming to learn, we're not actually aiming to learn, we want to maintain our customer relationship. I mean, being a small to medium size, logistics or freight forwarder or customs broker, you need to have something that is a bit different to, all the rest of the industry. And, we pride ourselves on the fact that, we understand our customer, and, we really offer a good customer service environment and so on. So I think, when you say learn, I think it's more about, re-educating our staff, because, with technology and so on, everything is so quick and electronic these days that I think it's, sometimes you've got to take a deep breath and maybe have a nice, feed or a drink and really get to know your customer, understand, and for them to understand you as well. And I think, any relationship, it's like a marriage. There's different stages of it, and, we need to continue that relationship and build on it so it can last for a long time. I'm looking forward to not doing as much work as I used to. I mean, with the kids taking over, it's allowed me to experience, my customers at a level that I haven't maybe over the last 4 or 5 years. So I've really tried to, and what I want to do moving forward is to, really engage with our customers, to really go out there and re-establish those relationships that, we built over the last 20 odd years, and I really look forward to that. I'm a people's person. I like to get out and about, and I like to talk to people and so on and so on. So I think that is something that I really look forward to, where this crazy period finishes, and then in the new year we can really go out there and reacquaint ourselves with our customers.